Hey everyone, I'm Katherine Davis, the Associate Editor here at Wisconsin Inno. Welcome to our latest virtual event. Thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate it. As a reminder, all of the attendees are on mute, but if you have a question for us or our guest speaker, please send those to the chat box provided by GoToMeeting, and we'll get to those and answer them towards the end of the event during the Q&A session. So for anyone that's unfamiliar with us and what we do, Wisconsin Inno is a local publication covering tech and startups throughout the state, primarily in Milwaukee, Madison, and Green Bay. We're part of a network of 14 publications which all cover tech and work to connect the people, companies, trends, and topics that are driving and defining each market, startup, and tech communities. So make sure to check us out at wisconsininno.com, and there you can sign up for The Beat, which is our email newsletter. And in it, we talk about the latest startup news and events you need to know about. This afternoon, we're having a fireside chat with Paul Radspinner, the president and CEO of FluGen. Based in Madison, FluGen has been developing vaccines to fight mutating strains of influenza around the world. And now in a COVID world, the company has pivoted and is working to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. So Paul, thank you for being here today. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the chance to share what we're up to here.
Yeah, of course. Well, this event will last about 30 minutes, so let's just dive in. So, Paul, before we chat about COVID, can you give us some background on FluGen? How did it get started? And, what did you set out, like, what was your original mission?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we started out with the goal of just making a better flu vaccine. So current flu vaccines, and I would recommend highly, especially with COVID out there, everybody get your flu vaccine. But even though they're effective and they can diminish the disease, they're not as good as they could be, and that was our goal. So I ended up working with Dr. Yoshi Kawaoka, who's one of the world's top virologists at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he and I and one of his colleagues, Dr. Gabby Newman, we decided to put this company together. And what we were going to do is take flu vaccine candidates that were different than what was already out there. Most flu vaccines now you inject into the arm. If you think about it, that's not where you get infected for a flu virus. You get infected through the nose and through the mouth. So we wanted to come up with an intranasal vaccine that would actually provide better protection against flu, and then also address this issue of what we call drift, or the fact that the vaccine doesn't match the strain that's out there circulating. And that's still an issue today. So that was our goal when we started the company, and we had 2 vaccine candidates right away. We were ready and raring to go, and we had money, and we were all excited. And that was, I'm going to admit that was 2007, and it didn't take us 13 years to get this far with one candidate. The first 2 candidates failed, and then we had to pivot and figure out how to find new candidates. And eventually we got to the candidate that we have now that's in phase 2 clinical trials.
Got it. And so that vaccine candidate is called M2SR, right?
Correct.
Okay. And it's being tested in human trials right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been in hundreds of people at this point. And M2SR, and I can try to describe it simply, is M2 is a gene or a piece of the flu virus. Flu virus is made up of 8 pieces, and it looks like a ball. And those 8 pieces, one of those, we take that out of the virus, and then what that allows is it allows the virus to infect your cells, but then the virus can't grow and transfer onto other cells like a real flu virus would. Mm-hmm. So that's what's different. So it's M2 single replication, meaning it only replicates one time and then it can't go any further.
Got it. And when this vaccine is ready, how will it be given to patients? Is it a shot?
No, intranasal. So there's currently one vaccine on the market, primarily for kids, called FluMist, that's given intranasally, so a spray or a mist in the nose. If you think of something like, allergy medicine that you spray into the nose, it'd be something similar to that. And what that does is it provides additional protection because when you get a virus shot into your arm, current vaccines are pretty much dead viruses shot into your arm. Tends to miss some of the components of your immune system. So our vaccine has that capability. So it kind of replicates being infected with the flu without getting the symptoms of the flu. That's the goal.
Got it. And so with the M2SR, what is the timeline of that vaccine? When do you expect it to be complete and ready for patients?
Yeah, you know, it seems now after everybody's watched COVID, it seems like, why didn't we get this done in 9 months, right? I mean, if they have all these COVID vaccines, why couldn't we do that? A number of reasons. You know, one is funding. Obviously, it takes a lot of money, and the money that's going into these vaccines for COVID is very much coming from the U.S. Government, other governments. But also, flu is a very different virus. Flu mutates very rapidly. COVID doesn't. And so what will happen is we are in phase 2 clinical trials now. We'll move toward a phase, what we call phase 2/3 trial in the next couple of years. And then that will be submitted for an approval with the FDA, and hopefully within kind of a 3 to 5 year period, we would be in the market, which sounds crazy when you think about it compared to COVID, right? 5 years versus nine months, what's wrong? But again, it goes back to the fact that the virus mutates so rapidly that it's a lot harder problem with flu to solve than it is with COVID, I think.
Right. So walk me through, your thought process when COVID-19 became a real threat here in the US. And how quickly did you pivot from focusing on that flu vaccine to now let's apply our resources to a COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, so it's in a way, I would say it's not as much a pivot as kind of doubling our efforts with the same amount of people. So it was kind of a rising to the challenge. So when COVID hit, we had my co-founder Yoshikawa Oka called me, and we had a discussion about whether there might be an opportunity to use M2SR. And let me explain that. So M2SR is used as a vector, or a more simple term that people may understand better is a Trojan horse, right? So remember that piece I told you take out that we create? Well, where that piece was taken out, you now put in a piece of COVID virus, and then when you spray it into the nose now, not only does it trigger an immunity to flu, but it also triggers an immunity to COVID as well. So that was the premise. And so we also had another partner, Bharat Biotech in India. And Bharat, actually, the president and CEO there is a UW grad. And so Krishna Ella has his company's made over 5 billion vaccines, primarily for the developing world, but we decided they understood our manufacturing system and all of the things there. So the actual construct itself, using our M2SR technology, is being developed in Dr. Kawaoka's lab. That vaccine then is tested in preclinical models, and then that is what we will move over to India to be manufactured, and the first clinical trials will be run over there. And so the difference between we're not in the Operation Warp Speed program. Obviously, that was for the bigger companies, but what we're making sure of is that we have something immunogenic and safe from the very beginning, instead of running it in parallel, which is what happened with most of the Operation Warp Speed companies.
Right. Okay. And so, can you sort of give us I think last time we talked, the FluGen's COVID vaccine was being tested in animals at UW Madison, right? So are you still in that phase, or have you moved on?
We're still in that phase because there are a number of models that need to go through, and you can easily get false positives. And so what we're trying to make sure is we have the perfect candidate, or the right candidate that's going to be safe and generate the immunogenicity that we have or that we need. We're watching also what's happening with the other candidates, and I don't know if you've seen some of those candidates, but some of the data that's come out on the candidates, they seem to be generating antibody immunity and getting the titers they need at least now. But there do seem to be quite a few side effects on some of the vaccines and so forth. So it's important to watch and see how that translates into what eventually is going to go into probably billions of people. To our knowledge, there's very few, if any, vaccines that are they're certainly not in Operation Warp Speed, but that are intranasally delivered. And a lot of people are thinking that that may be very important with this virus. And one of the reasons is you may get a vaccine injected into your arm, but you may have COVID in your nasal cavity. You're protected yourself, but you may be shedding or spreading that virus to other people. If you vaccinate in the nose, then what you know is you're not going to be shedding or spreading that virus, and you're going to be able to protect yourself on top of that. So it's almost like giving you a mask to wear while you're protected yourself.
Got it. Okay. And so, what are the unique challenges in developing a COVID vaccine, or is the biggest challenge just how quickly we need it?
Yeah, that's by far the biggest challenge because, you and I are talking from not from offices or in person. We're talking from our homes because most people are having to do that and work that way. I've been working that way since March. And so that's obviously, to get the economy going and get everybody back to normal. That's the number one thing is the time. But the one of the bigger challenges here is that we don't know that much about the virus. The virus is only really, to scientists that are really bright people, the virus is only about 9 months old, if that. And so we're learning new information every day about what the impact is. I think you've probably seen some of the information where athletes are being having their hearts damaged, for example. The virus is clearly breaking into places, not just the lungs, but getting into the brain, getting into kidneys, those kinds of things. So the more you learn about it, the more you know about the vaccine. But that process has to start right away so that you have a sense of what's there. So that's one piece. The other thing is we don't have a correlate for immunity. And what I mean by that is if the vaccine does this and I can measure it, I know it'll be effective. For flu, we have actually a correlate that says that if I hit this certain level of antibody titer, that I'll be about 50% effective. So we know that. We don't have that for the COVID virus. We don't know right now whether matching sera from people who are coming from or from convalescent sera, people who've been infected before, whether matching those titers is going to be protective or not. We just don't know. So that's a big challenge as well. The other thing is we're using a lot of new technologies too. So far, all of the lead candidates that are in Operation Warp Speed are using new technologies. mRNA at Moderna and Pfizer, those have not had commercialized vaccines with those technologies. And not that they couldn't be fantastic and work, but it's unknown at this point. And then also the adenoviral vectors from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. Again, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine there's been an Ebola vaccine with that technology, but we haven't had this in millions or billions, let alone billions of people at this point. So I think those are other challenges that we face with the vaccines at this point in time.
Okay. Just want to say as a reminder to our viewers, if you have questions, please put them in the GoToWebinar question box and we'll get to those towards the end. And so Paul, as your COVID vaccine moves to human trials, I don't know when you expect that to be, but what do you expect to be the biggest hurdles in human vaccine trials?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge right now is finding, you have to, because it has to be a placebo-controlled challenge, vaccine study. One of the challenges is trying to find exactly the places that COVID is flaring up. So a number of people started studies in the US when things were really hot and went to Florida and Texas and places like that, and then they cooled down. And then they went other places, and then they went to South America and to Africa. And So, that's been a challenge. And I think recently you might have seen that J&J announced that they were going to do not 30,000, but 60,000 subjects in their study. And I think part of that is to make sure that they get not only a very disparate group of people in terms of race, age, all kinds of underlying conditions, those things, but also to cover enough geographic areas to make sure that they end up in a position where they can get people that are actually going to get COVID. The other thing is you have to inform people of all the protections they need to take in order not to get COVID. So the placebo group, you're telling them to wear masks, you're telling them to socially distance, all those things we know that actually protect you from COVID. So you're in a way kind of hamstringing yourself along those lines. So that's the biggest challenge. I think the other challenge, the bigger companies seem to have done very well at recruiting people. I was amazed at how fast, for example, Pfizer was able to get the 30,000 subjects that they wanted in their study, and they've completed that already. And it's it's just a credit to the large pharma companies that have the resources and the experience of doing that. It's amazing. And then somebody like Moderna, the largest study they had ever done prior to this was about 250 subjects, 300 subjects. And now they're doing a 30,000 subject study. That's pretty impressive.
Right. How many people would you expect to be in a FluGen trial?
Yeah, the first one would be 300. That's where what you're looking for is you want to see that you get that immunogenicity that we talked about. What are the antibody titers? What kind of mucosal or nasal response do you get? And then is it safe? Are you seeing that people that receive the vaccine, and you want to probably look at at least a couple of doses, one shot versus two, or one spray versus two sprays. For example, Johnson & Johnson's vaccine right now is a single spray, or I mean a single shot, whereas the others are all two shots. So that could be an incredible advantage for that vaccine.
Mm-hmm. And so FluGen's COVID vaccine likely won't be ready in the first batch of vaccines that we see being approved, right?
No. No. And then there's no way. And I think that's actually probably a good thing. And the reason I say that is because we're going to learn a lot in terms of the first vaccines that flow through. Where are they working? What age groups? You may have seen in some of the early data, you're seeing side effects are higher in younger people than they are in older people. Well, that may suggest, not definitively, but it may suggest that the immune response is better in the younger people than it is in the older people. And if that's the case, that's a challenge because older people are the ones that are suffering most of the morbidity right now. Or I'm sorry, the mortality. They're the ones that are dying from COVID by far more than young people. And not that young people don't obviously die and get sick from it as well.
Right. So when your vaccine is ready, have you thought about, how you'll get this to people, and from a business perspective, how much will it cost and who gets it?
Yeah, that's so far down the road. And I think that a lot of that's already been established by the existing players. But I think there's no doubt. So the fact that in the developing world, we have a partner already with Bharat, who has a tremendous infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, and so forth. So for the same kind of vaccine in the US and Europe and so forth, I think there's no question that we would be looking and would need a partner that has that kind of infrastructure in place. You're going to need sales forces, you're going to need supply chains, delivery mechanisms. Currently our vaccine isn't requiring -80 freezers the way that Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines will, but if they did, then that's a huge infrastructure that you have to put in place. And if that were the case, then maybe we would benefit from that being there already. So I think it would definitely have to be a partnership similar to what we're doing in the developing world at this point.
Okay. And so can you kind of walk me through your day-to-day right now? I always imagine scientists working on vaccines, they're in the lab all day, but in a COVID world when we're supposed to be social distancing and a lot of people are working from home, I mean, what does your day look like? Are you going to a lab? Are you at home in your
Yeah.
basement
So
developing it? Like,
yeah, luckily I'm a business guy and I'm not the scientist that's behind all this. Our scientific team has been outstanding. Early on, we split our group into two shifts, and it's just kind of an early shift and a late shift. And the early shift comes in really early in the morning. And many of them actually prefer that. Some have kids at home that are having to do school virtually. So it kind of actually works better for them in some ways. And then there's a second shift that can go late into the evening if it needs to. So we did that so that we wouldn't overlap people in the two groups. And if one group were to be infected with COVID, then the other group could take over full time and just run a regular shift. So it's not been as productive in some ways, but in other ways, we've kind of learned a lot. And I think I've heard this, you've probably heard of other businesses learning that, for example, having people work from home on certain aspects of what they do can be very beneficial. They're actually more productive at home than they are focusing on coming in. Personally, I drive 45 minutes in and out every day, so I've got an extra hour and a half to get work done. And with Zoom now, we're able to get a lot of done with that we weren't able to before, or we could have done, we just didn't. So you are right, they are in a lab most of the time that they're there, but if they have things to do that don't have to do with the lab, whether it's write-ups or periodicals, catching up on the latest information, they can do that from home, and we're comfortable with that.
mm-hmm. Okay. And so to switch gears and talk a little bit about sort of, the cultural impacts of COVID and a vaccine, I've heard from experts that life won't really get back to normal until there's a vaccine, but of course that won't happen overnight. Not everyone's going to get this at the same time. So, based on what how long after a vaccine is approved or in production will society be able to resume normally?
So I don't think Dr. Fauci can answer that question. So far be it from me to be able to answer it, but I'll do my best pontification. I mean, you have what's called herd immunity, right? So you get to this place where you look to have people enough vaccination at a high enough efficacy rate that people are protected. And when you can get to that place, then you get the confidence that you can start to go, but to get out in the public and so forth. But most of the health experts you hear will tell you, that the days of masks and social distancing are going to be here for a while. I think the firm shutdown on everything, or a lot of things, may cut back some as vaccinations go. But the idea that we're going to have vaccine, personally, and I would love to be proven wrong, but the idea that we're going to have vaccines widely available before kind of spring of next year is I just don't see it. I think you start talking about logistics, you start talking about moving those vaccines, you start talking about healthcare workers probably being first priority. You talk about, and you move through that and start to get the, and you have some people that are probably not going to want to take a vaccine right away. So I think to get to that herd immunity is going to take a little while, and it's going to take, a really big effort by the community, by the medical community, by the the scientific community, by the companies that are making the vaccines. And it's a huge challenge, and I know we're up to it, but I just think that the timelines have been exaggerated in terms of setting expectations a little too aggressively.
Okay. Well, we're going to transition to the Q&A portion of our event. So as a reminder, viewers, please send questions to the GoToWebinar question box, and we'll get to those. One question is, there has been a lot of anxiety from some Americans right now about whether they'll be able to trust that a COVID vaccine is safe once it's available, based on politics mainly. And, from your point of view, working in this industry, what will you and other vaccine makers have to do to assure the public that a vaccine is safe, that it will work, that they should get it?
Yeah, great question. And I think, there's a lot of people who are what we call vaccine hesitant. And I think instead of demonizing those people, which some do, the important thing is to understand what's behind the concern. And it's incumbent on our industry to communicate to people that we are doing everything possible to make sure that what we put out there is something we stand behind and that it's safe, that we would take it and not think twice about it. And so I think that is part of what I was, kind of commenting on previously in terms of when things will be available. I think that we're all anxious to get rolling and get vaccines going and so forth, but we want to make sure that there's enough time to test the safety, to make sure people feel confident about what's going on. I think the one thing people should feel really good about is that the size of these vaccine trials, 30,000 plus people, and again, as I said, J&J 60,000 people. Those are really, really large vaccine trials. So if you look back in history for registration studies for vaccines to get into the clinic and to be given to the public, that size of trial is not typical. There are exceptions. There are some there's been studies as large as 100,000, but I think the numbers at 30,000, you start to feel pretty confident that that's a pretty good sized database. And then of course they will continue to monitor for safety as the vaccines are delivered out into the public. And so I think that's the key. And really just being transparent about everything, because the more we promise that something's going to happen overnight and that it's going to be here before you know it, I think we set expectations initially that people get excited about, but then they kind of step back and say, wait a second, do I want that vaccine that's coming out after 9 months when it normally takes 5 years? A lot of that's just due to fantastic science and just a lot of hard work. But we really want to make sure we're doing the right thing. And I think I think the companies are doing the right thing. In the end, I think they will come out and will take their time to make sure that those vaccines come out and they can stand behind them.
Got it. Okay. And you've been a part of Wisconsin's biotech scene for a long time. So how do you see the pandemic impacting it sort of generally, and kind of Wisconsin's tech and startup scene even more broadly?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of friends. I don't get to have my CEO breakfast every month these days, so that's one way. And then I think other things like the networking aspect. BioForward has its meetings, and they've done a great job with the virtual meeting concept like we're doing right now. And I think we've all kind of gotten a little used to this. I think we're all getting a little tired of it as well. We're kind of ready to get back to seeing each other in the hallways and that kind of thing. The Tech Council's also doing their annual startup convention. They're going to be doing that online as well. So that's the most obvious change that I think has happened, and some of that is good. Again, I think some of that will change the way we work forever and make us maybe a little less of an expectation that everybody put an 8 to 5 day in an office and that kind of thing, even though the IT world has been doing that for quite a long time. And so, but in the end, you still have to go to the lab, right? I mean, you can't you can't do that at home like you can the others. So excuse me, my phone's ringing in the background. So that to me is the big difference. I'm trying to think of other things that jumped out. For us as a business, I mean, partnering is really important with big pharma, and we were used to getting on airplanes and flying to Europe and meeting with major pharma partners to discuss potential collaborations and that kind of thing. And I was very worried that that was going to impact those opportunities were really going to get impacted. And what I've found is that pharma rolled with it extremely well. And so that we've been actually able to get time with big pharma much more readily because they're able to bring people together much more readily, right? They're oftentimes in disparate locations, and so it's tough to align the calendar. And now what we're finding is they can jump on an hour or 2 hour call pretty simply. So that's been a big positive from that we didn't expect originally.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I can say the same here, you know, from different angles, just in the journalism community. I mean, we're doing more events like this just because, you know, we don't have to get a ton of people in a room. It's easier for you to be here, easier for the attendees to be here. So it's just crazy how COVID has changed our way of work and life, but
Yeah,
hopefully there's some good things we'll take with us into the next phase.
we hope so. We hope so.
Well, that's all the time we have. So thank you so much for
Okay.
chatting with me today, Paul. This has been really great. I learned a lot. I'm sure our attendees learned a lot. So thank you again. Thank you for everyone that tuned in, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Katherine. Take care.
Thanks, Paul.